Hey, thanks for joining me for the third and final part of the 9-patch quilt creation. In this video I'll show you how to create your ring binding and attach it to your newly formed quilt without having to hand sew anything. For this part you'll need 7 strips of your fabric measuring 2.5 inch by the width of your fabric. I chose to use the navy blender for this one to properly frame the quilt. Simply cut them straight across their width, selvage to selvage. So here we go. The first step is to connect all those strips together. Take 2 strips and place the ends together as you can see here. Pin them together if you need to, but honestly holding them in place works well enough once you get used to it. So from the top left corner down to the bottom right corner, backstitch at the beginning and end. Before you trim off the excess fabric, open it up and make sure that the fabric goes directly across and not up in a backward L shape. If for some reason you get the backwards L, you've sewn across the wrong direction. Unpick the stitches and retry. Trim off the excess fabric so that you're left with a 1/4 inch past your stitch line. Trim off those dog ears at the top and bottom too. Move to the end of that second strip and attach the next one in the same way. Trim, then continue until all your strips are connected. Now for lots and lots of ironing. Fold the strip in half so that the wrong sides are together. Iron to create a nice sharp edge down one side and continue until you've ironed the entire length of that strip. And that's it, you just created your binding. This binding wouldn't be suitable for projects that have curves. For those you'd need bias binding. Same process, except you'd cut your original strips at a 45-degree angle instead. I would suggest rolling it up and popping in a pin to stop it unravelling as you work with it. Now to attach it. We'll work on the back of the quilt for this. Start about halfway down one of the longer edges of the quilt. Lay your binding with the raw edge against the raw edge of your quilt. Leave a 12-ish inch tail as we'll need this for connecting the ends. Begin pinning the binding to the back of the quilt down to the first corner. Sew down that edge using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. stop sewing 1/4 of an inch from the first corner. Lift the presser foot and rotate the fabric a little. I should point out you want your needle to still be in your fabric, so needle down at this point. Sew off the corner, remove from your machine, fold the binding up above the corner. Then fold it back down over itself. Pop this under your machine foot and sew, backstitch, then sew again from 1/4 inch in. You'll be able to feel where to start sewing once you get used to this method. Either line up the raw edge of the quilt edge and pin again, or if you feel it's easier, hold the fabrics in line and sew slowly. Repeat the step for the corners and continue sewing until you're about 10 to 12 inches from your starting stitch. Backstitch a little to secure the binding. Now comes connecting the two ends. Snip off a little of the excess binding to use as a guide. Lay out the quilt and mark halfway between the start and end tails. Lay out one of the tails and place the excess fabric you cut on top of it so that the centre line matches up with the line you marked on the quilt. Draw a line on the outer edge of the binding and repeat this for the other tail. You can't really see this on the video. I probably should have used a chalk pencil instead, but you get the idea. Trim both those ends. Fold your quilt in half so it's easier to move around. Place the two tail ends right sides together as you can see me doing here. Pop in a couple of pins to stop it from moving around. So from this corner to this corner, Pull the quilt open and make sure the binding will sit flat against the quilt. Once you're sure it's right, you can trim off the excess fabric, again down to 1/4 inch. Line the remainder of the binding against the edge of the quilt and sew as you did before. Now we're going to roll over the binding to the front of the quilt. We'll start in one corner. Fold the binding over. Then take the connecting edge and roll that over too. Try to fold these so that you end up with a lovely mitered corner. Begin sewing this down, so close to the edge of the binding. When you get to the next corner, simply fold it over in the same way. And continue sewing until your entire quilt is bound. I promise this method will become second nature once you've used it a few times, and it's never failed me. And that's it. You should have a wonderfully fully quilted and bound quilt. Fingers crossed the recipient will love it as much as I've loved making it. If you've not already done so, this is the point where you can go ahead and tie off the quilt threads and give the quilt an iron over to get rid of the pen marks that we've been using. And remember, this style of quilt will work with so many different fabrics. Take a look at our range. Any of the 100% cottons will work wonderfully. Thanks for watching, and please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more videos.